Many times after sharing my testimony in churches and congregations, people have asked me if I had the story of my life written in a book. At first I didn't pay attention to those questions about the book, but as people continued requesting, I prayed and asked God if this was His idea. I am like Gideon, always trying to make sure that I hear the right voice. In my prayer I said, God, if this is your will, please give me another direct confirmation. Please let someone say these exact words to me. Oxana, you need to write a book of your testimony. A few weeks later, we did a revival service in Butler, Missouri. I had only 45 minutes to share and sing, so I couldn't even share my whole story, just a little part of it. At the very end, when almost everybody had left, a woman approached me, and without any greeting, with no hello or shalom, she said to me, Oxana, you need to write a book of your testimony. Wow! I had goosebumps. This surely was the confirmation. I knew I had to take it seriously now. How in the world could I write a book? I even have an accent in every language that I speak. It just seemed to be a huge giant that I would never be able to fight. Finally, I pulled myself together and wrote one page of the book. I felt very proud of myself and even showed my first page to some friends. To my big surprise, they said they liked it, but I couldn't go any further. It just was too hard for me. I felt like Jonah, who didn't want to go to Nineveh. One day, after ministering in a Russian church in Oregon, one young lady came to talk to us. She wanted us to go together for dinner. At the restaurant, she asked Boaz and me to share a story about how we met, and we gladly told her our love story. The next day, she wrote me on Facebook that our story really touched her heart and also gave her hope and encouragement. Well, I thought to myself, why should I write the whole story of my life? It's so long and complicated. Why not start with a shorter story? I felt like I found a solution. I would just create a love story novel, which was also a great testimony and had a message by itself. I even had a catchy title for it, How I Met My Boaz and Ended Up in Peculiar. I started writing, but I still struggled. So I decided to take a writing course online. I also read a book called Writing Life Stories by Bill Rohrbach and signed up for critique writing groups. When I brought my writings to the critique group and read the first chapter of my love story, they said to me, "You can't just start the story like that. You have to give us some background." I wrote 3 pages of my background and came to the writing group again. I read my new pages with the condensed and compressed story of my life, hoping that now I would be done with the background and would be able to concentrate and continue with my love story again. They said, "Oh, this is much better, but we would like to hear more about what happened with you in Russia, Italy, Canada, and in Israel." Oh no, I'm not going to write the whole story. This is impossible. I decided I would just go to a different critique group. I couldn't believe that at the other critique writing group they also suggested that I write more about my past. Well, I felt convinced that it was God speaking to me through all those different people. I felt that I couldn't escape anymore. I had to write the whole story of my life because it is actually His story, and He is the real author of my life and of this book. My father always wanted to have a daughter named Vita. This was his mother's name. My grandmother Vita died at a very young age when my dad was only 14 years old. In Jewish tradition, it's a custom to call the children by the name of the close relatives who pass away for the sake of continuation of the name and its memory. My grandfather Oscar from my dad's side was alive when my mom got pregnant with me. He was excited while expecting his first and only grandchild to be born, but unfortunately he got very sick and died just 2 months before I was born. After his death, both of my parents decided to use the name Oscar for the baby who was due to come. When they realized that the newborn was a girl, they tried to find a Russian name with the letters O, S, K, A, and R, but there was no name like that in Russia, so they found a Ukrainian name, Oksana, that sounded similar. So The name Vita was never used in our family again. It was gone and kind of forgotten. That's why I decided to use the name Vita in my story to give this name life again, especially since the meaning of the word Vita is life. Part 1. A Russian Citizen. Chapter 1. Why Should I Be a Jew? At times, children hear things when we adults are sure that they aren't even listening. Vita is a smart little girl. She might understand more than we think, my father said. No, she is too young to comprehend. Please, Albert, don't tell her anything now. Overhearing the conversation between my parents, something didn't seem quite right. After all, they were always telling me that I was a big girl, so why was I too young all of a sudden? Paulina, we shouldn't wait any longer to tell Vita. The sooner she knows, the better. She needs to be prepared before she goes to school next year. It's time to tell her who she is. Okay, my mom finally conceded. I peacefully sang a song to my favorite dolly, Tanya, concentrated on dressing her. When I shifted my gaze to the dancing rays of light playing around the room, they looked like the little fairies that everyone always said didn't exist. Daddy had explained that the dance of light was caused by the fluttering leaves on the tall tree outside the window. As the leaves moved with a gentle breeze, they blocked the direct sunlight, creating the dance. I loved that dance. It had always fascinated me, but something had shattered my peace and enjoyment of the moment. I felt an unwelcome anticipation as my heart began to race. Vitusha, come here, sweetie. Daddy wants to tell you something. I picked up my doll from the floor and approached my father. Daddy, please, can you read a story to me and my doll, Tanya? Yes, but first I'd like to tell you something important about yourself. Okay. I looked at my father with wide eyes. You know we live in a big country. My dad kept his voice soft and persuasive. Many different people live here in Russia. Most of them are Russians, but some people, like us, are Jews. There is no difference between us. We are all equal, so it doesn't matter if you are Russian or Jewish, but I want you to know who you are. When you go to school, the teacher might ask your nationality. You'll need to tell her you are a Jew. Our kindergarten teacher said that people who live in Russia are called Russians, I explained confidently. Well, my dad smiled again and continued patiently. That's right. People who live in America, for example, are called Americans. But among them also live Chinese, Indians, Jews, and others. But why, Daddy? Why should I be a Jew? I don't want to be a Jew. I'd heard this word before and felt in my sensitive heart that it meant something bad, something people joked about. You are a Jew because you were born from a Jewish mother and father. I paused, wanting to argue, hoping I had another choice. My dad drew me close and kissed my forehead. I felt secure in his arms. I didn't quite understand why my father, who loved me dearly, wanted me to be a Jew. Daddy, what about my doll Tanya? Is she also a Jew? Dad smiled. Yes, she is a Jew too. Who else is a Jew? Many people, including your aunts, Vera and Shula, your uncles, Nick and Victor, your grandma and grandpa. Our whole family is Jewish. Being satisfied with these answers, I hugged my dad. Now, can we read a story? Chapter 2. My Parents. Life was good. As an only child, I got a lot of attention from my parents who loved and cared for me. We lived on the first floor in a small but bright two-room apartment with a tiny kitchen. There was a police station right in front of our building, and our home rattled with the noise of passing cars and loud voices of children playing in the small playground nearby. If it weren't for some bushes and trees in front of our windows, it would have been easy to see from the street everything going on inside our apartment. My father was a communist, not because he believed in communist ideology, but because in the 1950s and the 1960s only communist members could have a good position and a decent job to provide for the family. He managed a big bookstore in the center of Leningrad. My dad loved reading and always knew everything about each book and its author. In those days, books were in demand. Most people in Russia loved to read, and almost every home had a library. My parents had a huge collection of remarkable rare books. For my father, those books were a real treasure, but my mother considered them an unnecessary luxury. This led to frequent arguments. I loved my dad and was very attached to him. His kind round face with big brown eyes and a charming smile looked handsome in spite of his balding gray hair. He loved to spoil me and tried to bring me something every evening, a candy, a little toy, or a new book. I always ran to the door when he came home asking, "Daddy, did you bring me anything today?" Life in Russia in the 1960s wasn't easy. Even though both of my parents worked, they couldn't get out of debt and often argued about money. I hated those arguments. I wanted to fix this situation. I had a plan in my mind. All I needed to do was to earn a lot of money and give it to them. Then they would never quarrel again. From a young age, I dreamed about the day I would be able to buy a dress for my mom and a suit for my dad. My mother, a very attractive woman with short blonde hair, big blue eyes, and beautiful full lips, loved to wear bright colors and be the center of attention. She worked in a supply department at a small company. I considered my mom to be the most important employee, as her colleagues always needed something from her. She talked on the phone with them day and night. My mom had great communication skills and always supplied her company with everything they needed. My parents were totally secular. They didn't keep any Jewish traditions, holidays, or festivals. They both loved parties and often had friends over to our little apartment. The table was full of tasty dishes. Women helped in the kitchen. Men smoked cigarettes and chatted. Everybody dressed up fancy. They proposed toast after toast, always praising my mom's cooking and the Kaminskys' hospitality. I liked it when Mom and Dad had people over. They seemed happy when they had a party. My father wrote funny poems and read them aloud while everyone laughed and commented. They had a lot of vodka and wine on the table. My mom never drank alcohol, except a little champagne. Dad wasn't a big drinker either, but most of their guests were usually very drunk by the end of the evening. At times they spoke a strange language and laughed. I was curious and always tried to understand what was so funny. Only many years later I realized that they spoke Yiddish, the language of the adults' secrets. My parents weren't faithful to each other. I knew they fooled around with other people, but it seemed to be a normal lifestyle. This is how they lived their whole lives, truly loving each other, but also having a separate life on the side. I did not like that at all, but I didn't know that wasn't a usual thing. I thought every family lived this way. Yet in my mind, I was sure that I would be absolutely different when I grew up. Chapter 3: School of Communism. I dived into a different new world when I went to school. We grew up learning about evolution and were taught that only people in previous generations were so narrow-minded as to believe in the Bible and in God. In our perfect socialistic system, we had advanced beyond such foolishness. We acknowledged without a shadow of a doubt that we originated from a monkey and not from God. I trusted every word we were taught, namely to admire only the Communist Party and its leaders. When I was 8 years old, I became an Octoberist. Young Octoberists in the Soviet Union were students of 7 to 9 years old who were united in a group at pioneer school squads. The groups were led by counselors from the Pioneers and Komsomol members. In these groups, the children were preparing to join the Union Pioneer Organization, named after Vladimir Lenin, the Marxist revolutionary who led the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. When a child joined the ranks of young Octoberist children, a lapel bridge was issued, a 5-pointed ruby star with a portrait of Lenin as a child. The term Octoberists came from the Great October Socialist Revolution. The Octoberists were considered truthful and courageous, hard-working children who liked school and respected the elders. They were seen as clever and skillful in honor of the great Lenin. Every little child in Russia, including me, dreamed of being an Octoberist. In 1971, when I was 10, I became a pioneer. The Pioneer Organization educated young Leninists in the spirit of communist ideology and loyalty to the Soviet motherland. The Pioneer Organization accepted students from 9 to 14 years old. As a rule, the ceremony of accepting new pioneers took place in a festive atmosphere during the communist holidays at memorable historical and revolutionary sites. For example, in my case, the ceremony took place near a monument to Lenin on April 22nd, which was Lenin's birthday. The purpose of the Pioneer Organization was to recruit young fighters for the cause of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The goal was expressed in the motto of the organization. On the call, "Pioneer, be ready to fight for the cause of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union," the answer was, "We are always ready." The communist government's main purpose was to develop a spiritual culture of inflexibility to all that is foreign to the socialist way of life. When I entered into the Pioneer Organization in the Pioneer lineup, like all the others, I proudly tied my red Pioneer tie and was presented with a special Pioneer pin. I gave a solemn promise to the Pioneer, Komsomol, and communist organizations of the Soviet Union. Each of us had to memorize and say loudly in front of the parents, the leaders, the teachers, and the students who gathered for this special occasion, this solemn promise to the Pioneer, Komsomol, and communist organizations of the Soviet Union. I joined the ranks of the All-Union Pioneer Organization, named after Vladimir Lenin. Before my comrades, I solemnly promise to dearly love my country, live, learn, and fight as bequeathed to the great Lenin, as taught by the Communist Party, and always to comply with the laws of the Soviet Union pioneers. I completely embraced the philosophy, values, teachers, and uniform, and was proud to be a pioneer, to wear the red tie around my neck. I was good at mathematics and enjoyed studying Russian literature. Usually, at the beginning of the semesters, teachers went through the students' list, checking if all the information was correct. When the teacher deliberately inquired, "Vita Kaminsky, what is your nationality?" I felt so embarrassed to stand up and pronounce in front of everybody that I was a Jew. I wished I'd been like everyone else, a regular Russian girl. If only I could erase this little word Jew from my documents. I lived in a regime where common was good and different was bad. Communism shaped us to think the same, to look the same, and to talk the same. I was ashamed because I was different, but I did not understand my identity. I was always a people person and loved company, playing with many girls after school. We often visited each other and did our homework together. Some of the girls whom I considered my close friends, when we argued, would say to me, "You are a dirty Jew. Go to your Israel." Why do they send me to Israel? My homeland is Russia. I have nothing to do with that Jewish country and their culture. This put a bad taste in my mouth for Israel. I hated to hear about Israel and never wanted to go there. I learned about Israel from the news. There was constant propaganda against it in the media, where Israelis were always shown as an aggressive nation fighting poor and peaceful Arab people. I considered Israel a very underdeveloped and backward place where citizens still rode camels and went barefoot. My mom and dad always told me, "You need to hang out with Jewish friends, and in the future you should marry only a Jew." I didn't like that my choices were so limited in choosing boyfriends, but deep in my heart, I knew my parents were right. Anti-Semitism was in the air. It was harder for a Jew to get a good position at work. There were limits on how many Jews could be accepted by the university. It was hidden, but every Jewish family knew this and tried to educate their children to be the best of the best. In Jewish families, it was a custom to give children extra music education. When I was about 9 years old, my father took me to private piano lessons. It seemed to me he was attracted to my music teacher, Lena, a very kind, patient, and good-looking woman. I enjoyed learning to play the piano, but at times struggled with the music notes. Lena often said to my father, "Vita is a very good student. She makes great strides. I'm pleased how fast she is learning and progressing. I studied with Lena for only 1 year and was sad when my dad's schedule had changed and he couldn't take me to the lessons anymore. For 3 months every summer, my parents sent me to a pioneer camp where they divided us according to our ages into groups called pioneer units. It was exciting to march every morning to the special pioneer lineup, carrying red flags and singing patriotic songs. We were kept busy with many different activities. We played games, had sport competitions, painted, sewed stuffed toys to give to poor kids, and worked on collective farms pulling weeds. There was very little free time, so the days ran by quickly. I especially loved to be part of the choir, where we learned and sang new songs. Once a month we had a Parents' Day. This was considered to be the greatest day of the month, and we would prepare for it in advance with great anticipation. There was a talent show and a big play. Every child had to perform and participate. Some children sang in a choir, others read poetry or acted, and some did acrobatics. Parents brought us sweets and chocolates and special food from home that we missed so much. It felt like a great holiday. There were some kids whose parents didn't show up. Usually everyone tried to share sweets with those kids to make them feel better, but it was still a painful situation. Some children were homesick and cried a lot when their parents had to leave. I also missed my mom and dad during the pioneer camps, but I never cried or felt alone, as I was always active and didn't have time to be bored. In one of the pioneer camps when I was 13, I was the lead singer in the choir. When we performed, I was very nervous, but at the same time, I felt great and proud of myself to be the main singer. It was a big honor for me. In our pioneer camps, we always had a quiet time after lunch. We had to lie in bed and have a nap for 2 hours. All the girls, about 15 to 17 of us, slept in one big room. Most of the time, I couldn't sleep in the middle of the day, so when the teacher of our unit came to the room, I had to pretend that I was asleep. One afternoon, when I was lying in bed, I heard the heavy footsteps of an adult. I immediately turned to the right side and closed my eyes, pretending that I was sleeping. The footsteps grew louder as they came closer. I felt that someone stood right behind my bed. I didn't see who it was as my eyes were tightly closed, but I suddenly felt someone touch my forehead with a handful of oil. The oil ran down my nose and it felt so weird. I didn't understand what had happened and why the teacher would do it, but I was afraid to look because she could be mad at me for being awake. After I was sure that she was gone, I wiped my nose. It was such a strange experience. I had never shared it with anyone, and to this day I still wonder, what could it be? Chapter 5. The Truth About Komsomol. Time was passing by fast. In 1975, when I was 14, I became a Komsomolets, a member of the Communist Political Youth Union of the USSR. Anyone at the age of 14 to 28 years could become a Komsomol member. Through the structure of this organization, the government controlled the ideological education of youth and implemented political and social projects. These were our Komsomol's mottos. The party and Komsomol have one goal: Communism. If the Communist Party says it is necessary, Komsomol will answer, "Aye, aye, sir." It's fascinating how smart, meticulous, and detailed the purpose of this system was. It sounded so moral and upright. They had the best principles, many of them even completely corresponded with biblical principles. But the only problem, they took God out of it. Somehow it took me so long to see all the corruption behind these mottos. When in college, at one of the Komsomol meetings about accepting new members, I dared to say about a student, "I don't think she is ready to be a Komsomolets. She doesn't do her homework and doesn't even show up for classes." They almost laughed at me because I was so naive and stupid. I was confused and still didn't understand why they didn't follow the principles that Komsomol taught. In our high school, only exceptional students were accepted to Komsomol. There were criterions we had to pass. At times it was harder than final exams. I remember studying for weeks to be prepared well. Our school Komsomol committee asked me 40 different questions about politics and ideology, and I had to answer all of them correctly. In addition, a student who wanted to be a Komsomolets should have good grades, know well the ideology, never be late to classes, and always have good behavior, with no record of arguing with teachers or not doing homework. After the meeting, I asked one of my friends, "What was the deal with that girl, and why are you so eager to get more people in Komsomol?" "Don't you know, Vita? We have a quota. We must get at least 10 more people every month. It's a requirement from the Communist Party leaders." "Oh, I see." I was shocked. So it was nothing about being exceptional or being a good student, following the rules, respecting elderly people, and giving all your heart to what you do and believe. All these were just lies. I had been questioning many other things concerning the communist system, but not until college did it finally dawn on me that all these years I had believed in something that didn't really exist. I finally realized how false the ideas of the communist society were. The system was created to control us, to blind us from the real world and from the truth of life. I felt so deceived and disappointed. Only then did I understand why they had such strict censorship and didn't want people to find any information or to have any choices. Chapter 6. Cool Lifestyle. Being an adventurous teenager, I went for an exciting 10-day boat trip where we slept in tents and cooked over campfires. On this tour, I had a crush on a charming 22-year-old guy who sang and played guitar very well. I begged him to show me how to play the guitar, and he taught me one song that had only 3 chords. This was enough to ignite my passion for learning more. After the trip, I ran home every day to my new guitar that my parents bought me. I watched people who played guitars, trying to catch the new chords and different rhythms. I was desperate to learn and spent hours practicing until my fingers had calluses. Finally, I found an evening music school and studied classical guitar for 1.5 years, going to college in the morning and music school in the evening. I began to write my own lyrics using well-known melodies. Most of them were vulgar songs for fun and jokes, as well as some love poetry and dedications to my parents or men I liked. After getting a college degree in trade economics, I got a good job representing the government in trade and commerce exhibitions. I still lived with my parents in the same 2-room apartment, where one room was a living room as well as my parents' bedroom. With my first paycheck, I bought a set of new furniture for our home. I was happy to help my mom and dad, contributing the money that I earned to our family budget. Somehow we never had this division. This is my money and this is yours. We lived together as a family and always wanted to give to each other. My mom often bought me things that were luxurious. She wanted her daughter to have only the best and never experience lack of anything. I started living a cool lifestyle, smoking and drinking, telling dirty jokes, watching pornographic films. Self-centered and arrogant, I endlessly cheated and lied and never felt remorse, though I always considered myself a person with high moral standards. My life revolved around boys, parties, and entertainment. I got used to being told that I was a beautiful young woman. I liked to dress provocatively and be noticed in the crowd. I was lucky and always got what I wanted. With my girlfriends, we often went to a disco or some military academy to dance. Even if I had a crush on someone, it was only for a few weeks or even less. As soon as I had a chance to know the person better or go on a date with him, disappointment and emptiness took over me. I was always looking for love, but couldn't find it anywhere. Music filled this gap in my soul. I liked the rehearsals that we had twice a week with my music ensemble. It was a group of 6 college girls who performed at every college event during the holidays and for special occasions. We stayed after classes at the large college lobby where in the corner there was a big white grand piano. Our music teacher was an extremely talented musician who taught us to sing in harmony. This was my delight. The unity of first and second soprano voices with an alto voice fascinated me and was like a balm for my heart. While studying in college, I met Sam through one of my friends and her boyfriend from school. The four of us hung out together a lot. I never looked at Sam as a potential boyfriend. He was a very cool and fun person, but just a good friend. I didn't know if he was attracted to me or if it was for another reason, but Sam bet his friend Victor that he would become my boyfriend. Being good friends is a good start for a romantic relationship. I enjoyed our friendship very much and got attached to Sam. One day we found out that our mothers were close friends in their childhood. This was an interesting coincidence through which I found out that Sam was Jewish. I was very surprised and looked at him with different eyes. My mom called Sam's mom and they talked happily for a long time and arranged to meet. One weekend, Sam and his family came to visit us. I found it a little strange when Sam showed up with his mother, but I had to admit that in a little while the atmosphere felt like family. We did start dating, so Sam won the bet. In the middle of our stormy love, he was called to the army. Our plan was to get married in 2 years upon his return from the military. At that time, when a young man went to the army, he never knew where he was going to serve. Usually, the family could get some information about their child only after a month or two, when they received their first letter from him. In 1978, many Russian soldiers were sent to Afghanistan, and many of them didn't come back. Being a Jew, Sam believed that he had a 100% chance of serving in Afghanistan, so he took a risk that saved his life. One of his officers, instead of handing Sam's army ID back to him, forgot to have him sign for it and just put it on the table. Sam was a smart young man and took advantage of the situation. Late at night, when everybody was asleep, he took his army document from the table and burned it. The officers couldn't find his ID anywhere and had to issue a new one. It took almost 3 months for Sam to get his new army document. This delay bought Sam some time, and he missed the assignment to serve in Afghanistan. Instead, he was sent to Siberia for his 2-year hitch. I faithfully waited for Sam during his service. He came back from the army and we got married. We had to live with my parents even after we were married. In Russia, only when a couple got married could they apply for a home of their own. There was a long waiting list for new apartments, and it usually took years before the government provided a new home for a couple. Even if people had money to buy a house, it still wasn't an option, as all the real estate was fully controlled by the Soviet government, and only they assigned apartments. After 1.5 years, my daughter, Natalie, was born, and she became the center of my life. I loved to read books to her and sing songs to her while playing my guitar. She was such a cute little girl, very smart and active. She truly was the joy of my life. We still were living with my parents when Natalie was born, so we had to rearrange our apartment and build a temporary wall to have a little more privacy. This way we didn't have to go through my parents' room or have them walk through our bedroom. I wished we didn't live in such tightness and lack of space, but I couldn't complain. We were still considered very lucky. Some families lived in communal apartments and had to share a bathroom and a kitchen with strangers. Sam worked in a furniture store where after a few years he became a manager. Even with this good position, he had a poor salary. In communist Russia, there was no private market, and all the jobs were government jobs. They paid very little, so to make a living, Sam did business that was not allowed in Russia. The authorities knew people couldn't survive living on just their salary. They also knew very well that people in those positions were doing this illegal business. It made the people vulnerable, since at any moment the government could take them to prison. When Natalie was 3, we finally got our own apartment. It was a small home with 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen. After a few years, Sam and I were no longer faithful to each other. At times when Natalie slept over at Sam's or at my parents' house, I would say to Sam, "I'm staying at my girlfriend's house tonight," and I didn't come home at all. We lied to each other, and we knew that we did. Somehow, with being around friends all the time, having parties and entertainment, keeping another life on the side, We lived for years being certain that this lifestyle was absolutely normal. We often had parties at our home. Friends sometimes visited unexpectedly. It didn't matter if it was a weekend or a weekday, if we needed to go to work the next day or not. The Russian culture required hospitality almost at any cost. The friends usually came with a bottle of wine or vodka, and we always found a reason to celebrate and get drunk. One day we had a party in a restaurant. Sam's parents were with us, as it was a New Year's celebration. Sam disappeared for about 40 minutes and then came in half drunk with a girl. I had no idea who she was. Sam introduced her to everyone. When he approached me, he said to the girl, "This is my sister." I was a little shocked, but it played well for my situation and gave me even more confidence that my infidelity was totally justified. On International Women's Day, the 8th of March, which was celebrated every year in Russia, Sam and I, with some other friends, went to a restaurant where the manager was an acquaintance. His name was Grisha. I questioned Sam. "Would you ask Grisha to let me sing a song at his restaurant?" I hoped perhaps to get a job as a singer. This was my dream. To my big surprise, Grisha immediately agreed for me to sing a song. I got to the stage, took the microphone, and started to sing a famous song which I knew very well. People continued dancing. This was awesome, and I sounded really great. Everybody clapped. I felt such joy. How wonderful it would be to work here and sing every night, I thought to myself. Grisha smiled and said to Sam, "She can start working next week if she wants to." Yes, this is exactly what I want, I said to myself. I was so excited, but even with all my passion about this job, I had to turn it down because my daughter Natalie was still very young and I needed to take care of her. Chapter 8. Leaving Russia. In 1988, it was the beginning of perestroika, the restructuring of the communist system, when Jews were being let out of the Soviet Union. Many of our Jewish friends started to think about leaving Russia. It was a major event if someone left the country. Only Jews were permitted to do this because of international agreements and the right of Jews to return to Israel, and those who left were considered traitors. I never wanted to go to Israel, but dreamed about America, the country of success and possibilities. I planned to get rich, have a big house and a fancy car, build a successful career, and travel the world. My Uncle Nick, my mom's brother, lived in New York with his wife and daughter for a few years. They had joined the middle class of America and seemed to be happy. "Vita, when you come, you can stay with us for a while," Nick said over the phone. "You'll have a refugee visa, so it won't be a problem at all, as you'll receive help from the American government. Don't worry, it'll be all right," Nick encouraged me. "That's awesome. Thank you, Uncle Nick." I appreciated both Sam's and my parents for supporting us to leave the USSR. They wanted us to have a better life in a free country. They took a risk, as they might not see their granddaughter and me again. Russia was always unpredictable, and nobody knew what would happen next and how long the gates would remain open. As a result of my decision to leave, my father had many problems at his work. They threatened to fire him for allowing his daughter to betray the country. We prepared for our departure, realizing we'd have to start a new life in a new place, acquire new friends, new language, new values, new jobs, and even a new mentality. We hoped to quickly get settled in America and bring our parents to where we would be. The Russian government fined us 500 rubles because of bad behavior, namely for leaving our motherland. The average wages then were 120 to 140 rubles per month. They took away our Russian passports since we were no longer considered citizens of the USSR. Instead, they gave each of us a piece of paper with our pictures glued to it, and our names, dates of birth, and that we were Jews stated on it. This was the only ID we had when we left our homeland. Even if we had thousands of dollars, the Russian government very generously would have permitted us to take abroad only $147 per person. This was the only money we had when we departed from Russia. We left the USSR in March of 1989. At the airport, my father hugged me tight. Vitusha, my little girl. His eyes filled with tears. We said goodbye like we would never see each other again. My mom and I held hands, hugged and cried. Vita, if you can't call us, please write us as soon as possible. Be careful, and take good care of Natalie and yourself. Please don't forget to eat well. Mom, Daddy, please don't cry. We will be fine. There is a much better life where we are going. I will do everything I can for you to come to America soon. I love you. We will be together again, I promise. Vita, we need to go, Sam said. They have already announced the boarding. Taking Natalie's hand, she was only 5.5, I moved to the security section, looking back from time to time and waving to my parents and friends who came to say goodbye. There were many other families around with the same heartbreaking situation. With the noise of conversations, constant airport announcements, huge suitcases and bags everywhere, it was hard to move through the crowd. Natalie and I waved to my parents one more time from a distance. They didn't see the tears running down my cheeks.